The Edmonton Oilers just showed you they're capable of winning the Stanley Cup this year on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this jam-packed Game 1 victory edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone that's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is my first full season in the books as host of Locked On Oilers. This is my third season with the Locked On Podcast Network, and I am so grateful to be here on this journey with the Edmonton Oilers for the second straight postseason. And we'll start today's show with a bit of an overarching theme, a conversation about the direction they're going in and the progress they're trying to make. We touched on it yesterday, the idea of trying to make incremental progress as the postseason goes along. We will talk about stylistically what worked well for the Oilers tonight, and then we'll tie a bow on this segment, talking more on the show, not the segment, with a big picture conversation about the direction of the series, kind of getting back to what we talked about on yesterday's preview episode, the idea of gaming out the series. So first things first, you went on the road and you won game one. Big accomplishment. That is something you feel actively good about. You got to split on the road out of the gate. Now, rest of the way, even if you only win the rest of the games back in your home rink, you've put yourself in an advantageous position. Winning a game on the road is arguably the hardest part of these playoff series when you are the team that doesn't have home ice advantage. So getting that out of the way early starts to help you when you're gaming it out. But one of the things I watch for, and I wrote this down at the start of my note sheet, how is this game going to shape? Because there are two schools of thought when it comes to the first period of a first game in a playoff series. Do you want to feel each other out and be tactical and wait to make your runs, wait to make your pushes, and shoot for offense when it's opportunistic? Or do you just want to play your game? And sometimes it's very easy to fall into that conservative trap of trying not to push too hard because you don't want to make a mistake. But the counterpoint, and the reason you don't really want to do that, you get away from your game. You get away from what you're good at, and it puts you in a disadvantageous position where you have to get up to your game. And that's how this game started, as a matter of fact. Vegas scoring first and getting Vegas scoring first off of that power play, which, if we are going to go by the way hockey is supposed to be officiated, you can't call that penalty because you didn't call an initial penalty on the ice. You waited till until that Vegas player was Tomas Hertl came up, held his face, and then you got a delayed call. And that's why the referee saying the call on the ice confirmed isn't correct. There wasn't a penalty call initially. You saw the player get up injured, and you didn't call the penalty in real time. It's fine. The Oilers give up a power play goal there. The penalty kill definitely still needs work. It was better as this game went along. It had a nice one towards the end of the game in the third period that was really helpful as far as momentum-wise, but I was worried that with Vegas getting out to a lead early, they would be able to do what they do well. Vegas clogs the center lane of the ice with maybe the best defense in the entire NHL in that center lane area of the ice between the two circles and the hash marks, where teams like Edmonton live for those cross-seam passes and using width. Of course, no Alex Pietrangelo tonight in game one for Vegas. That injury is a sickness situation, I should say, not illness. Definitely a cause for concern for Vegas, a player who was physically compromised in the first round against Minnesota, as Chris Gawlik told us on the preview episode that ran on Monday. The Oilers were able to make some things happen for themselves in this game. And to Vegas's credit, they blocked so many shots. They clogged so many passing lanes. It was a real slog. And the Oilers had a ton of possession in this game. They had a ton of zone time. They had a ton of puck control. They outchanced Vegas 55-41. They outshot them 22-9 at 5-on-5 in this game. They out high danger chanced them 13-3. They out expected goals them 2.51 to 0.99. The Oilers had the lion's share of possession. They had close to a 2/3 majority of the important possession in this game. And the conundrum, and I said this about game 4 against the Kings. No, excuse me, game 5, the game the Oilers absolutely dominated, but it took them a while to break through. And when you can't get rewarded, when you are trailing for an extended period of time, like the Oilers were down 2-0 at one point in this game, and they brought it up on the broadcast. The Oilers were 26-0 in the playoffs going back to 2021 with a multi-goal lead on home ice. That is a daunting task against a really good defensive team that has a goalie who has won a Stanley Cup, who has been one of the best playoff performers over the last 4 or 5 playoffs in Adin Hill. And the Oilers took some time to get to their game, to find what they wanted to do. And then you got to break through. You got a McDavid zone entry off the rush who found Corey Perry, and Perry's able to jam it. Corey Perry outweights Adin Hill. Hill has to make a move to try and break up the shot. Perry just goes around him, and then you're at 2-1. You go into the second period only down a goal after playing okay. The second period is where the Oilers take over this game. They outshoot at Vegas 14-1 all situations in the second period. You hit a couple posts. And what really separated the game here in this second period was the fact that the Oilers were able to drive offensive zone time and really get to work on the cycle. And look, it is really hard to stick with it. That cycling, that forechecking, that high to low play, those looking for those point shots just to work on offense, just to grind it out, especially if you're not being rewarded, because it's physically taxing. You are going to eat hits. You are going to burn energy. And the Oilers' ability to stick with it and to stay with it. And in spite of the fact that Vegas kept blocking shots, Adin Hill was making great saves, the fact they hit a couple posts, they stuck with it until they were able to make something happen. And when you have that stick-to-itiveness, when you have that mindset of, okay, we can stay with this, we're going to break through. And the Draisaitl goal that ties this game at 2 is the epitome of stick-to-itness. That puck gets in deep. Draisaitl banks it off of Adin Hill's back. Hill and the 2 Vegas defensemen in the crease scramble furiously trying to keep that puck from crossing the line, but it goes over. You tied the game. Now you've had game control for for a full period. You have tied a game that you had frankly not played amazingly up until that point. And then at 2-2, on the road, you are just waiting for your opportunity. You're waiting for your opportunity. And Edmonton's still controlling the game. And they know if we stick with this, we can break them down. If we stick with this, we can break them down. And then the more you get them uncomfortable in their own end with the dump and chase stuff, the more that transition play is going to open. And that's what you saw. You saw Hyman off the rush. You saw Connor Brown off the rush. And that's what puts this game over the top for the Oilers. They got to their game. It took them a period, not a great first period, but you can trade 2 periods for 1 period. That's a good trade-off. You know, would you rather have $1 or 3/4 type deal when you're talking to a 6-year-old? The Oilers played more than well enough to win tonight. And yes, Vegas missing Victor Olofsson, missing Alex Pietrangelo. The Oilers will need to recalibrate if and when those players re-enter this series. But that was the type of effort tonight that's going to take to win most nights rest of the way. It won't look as pretty in the box scores and the expected goals and the high danger chances, more likely than not. But that's the type of game you put up here and you think, if they can do that against Vegas, they can beat anyone any given night. That's a really good feeling. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we're going to talk a little bit stylistically about what worked for the Oilers, what they were able to get going in that second period, and what line combinations are particularly well suited for that. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily nutritional value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller for longer. Personally, I am a big fan of the no-shell variety. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days, whether I'm snacking at my desk working on the show doing research, or I just need a quick protein fix to hit my macros for the day. They're a great go-to. Or if you're old school and you love cracking open every single shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Wonderful Pistachios provides all 9 essential amino acids as a complete protein. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Game 1 Victory Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. And that's the type of game you really start to believe. And hand up, I came into this series worried. I was very reticent to feel good about the Oilers coming into this series because of Vegas's defense and because of the Aiden Hill advantage. And I got to put my hand up and say it. Calvin Pickard did just enough tonight. Was he great? No. We talked about it. The .99 expected goals at 5-on-5. Not great. And you talk about it in terms of all situations. It's definitely a little more fair. Yeah, when we're talking about all situations, he's actually a plus .08 goal saved above expected on the game. So that's something you can feel pretty good about. And we've long since established this, that this might be the first talking point I ever gave on this show last year when I took over on an interim basis in the first round. If the Oilers goalie needs to be the guy on a given night for the Oilers, they're probably not going to win that game. The Oilers goaltending situation, it's just not that caliber of player. They don't have a Shesterkin, a Vasilevsky, a Bobrovsky, a Jake Ottinger. They are very much a front-to-back team. The forwards do a majority of the heavy lifting. The defense does enough. And then the goaltending holds on for dear life. And to his credit, Calvin Pickard made quite a few high leverage saves at key points in this game, gave the Oilers a chance to stay in it. I don't think he really had a chance on the Stone goal in transition that made it 2-0, or on the redirection, the double redirection, frankly, that went off of a point shot off of William Karlsson, off of Mark Stone. So I think the goaltending being what it was tonight gave them a chance. And then as far as stylistically, the thing for the Oilers that's been fascinating to watch play out over the course of this season, and if you're new, welcome. I'm glad you're here for the playoff run. Something I've been talking about with the everydayers for probably about 6 or 7 weeks now was during one of the intermissions, I forget who they were playing. I want to say it was one of the games against the Ducks late in the regular season. It might have been the Kraken. I don't recall who. They were Bob Stauffer was talking on the intermission report about how the Oilers over the course of this season have transitioned to a cycle-based team, meaning that they are not as dependent on, I couldn't think of the word to conjugate that sentence so it was proper English. They are not as dependent on creating with speed off of the rush. And don't get me wrong, that's still the MO when McDavid is on the ice. If Leon's with him, that's generally how they're going to try and create. If they're separate from each other, Leon will carry the puck into the zone, but not with as much speed. He's a little more inclined to finesse his way into the zone, making defenders miss using his leverage. But when they play those two together, when Connor and Leon are on the first line like they were for a majority of the game tonight, I want to say they checked in somewhere in the ballpark of 9 minutes of 5-on-5 play together, if I remember correctly when I was looking at my notes here, Oilers forward lines. Yeah, the three of them checked in at 9:30 tonight, and then they had a 9:30 with Corey Perry, and then they had a minute with Evander Kane. So about 10 minutes of Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl 5-on-5. And the rest of those minutes, there was a clear emphasis on getting the puck in deep and putting Vegas in conflict. And This is one of the real takeaways that you can glean. And this will tie into what we're talking about in our third segment as well. But regardless of who you're playing, the more you make them do things, no matter what it is, if it's offense, if it's defense, the more opportunities you have to influence the game. And when the puck is 200 feet away from your net, you are doing a great job of influencing the game. Now, you are not going to play as good of defense and you're not going to have as good a forecheck as you did tonight every game. There's just too much volatility up and down. There's too many variables to consider. But the foundational principles of good hockey were on display tonight. They created off of the forecheck. They got zone time. They made Vegas play defense. So the first trickle-down effect of making Vegas actively play defense is you're tiring them out. You're making defenders go left to right. You're making them chase forecheckers around the net front and behind the net. You are putting them in conflict. And then once you start to tire these guys out, A, they're more likely to take penalties. B, you're more likely to make them make a mistake, whether they're in zone or whether they're in a man-to-man. And it depends. Some teams, the way their rules apply for defensive coverage, it depends where the puck is. So sometimes if the puck's below the goal line, you're going to see two defenders and then a forward come over to try and over-leverage to win that puck to create a breakout. If it's above the goal line, you're typically only going to see one player pressuring the puck carrier above that goal line to try and create a change in possession at the top of what is their defensive zone, the other team's offensive zone. So with that in mind, you found a way to make an actively good defensive team in Vegas play more defense than they wanted to. And they talked about this on the broadcast tonight as well. When you are spending 45 seconds to a minute and a half at a time defending in your own end, you don't have energy for offense. You need to get that puck out of the zone. You need to cross the red line. You need to send it in. You need to get off and change. And once you send that puck in, Edmonton's going to go back. They're going to regroup. And tonight, John Klingberg, two really nice first passes out of the zone that led to scoring plays. So if the other team, Edmonton in this case, is good at breaking the puck out, and if you put Bouchard on one pair, Klingberg on another pair, and Kulak's not terrible at it, though he's more of a skate the puck out than pass the puck out type defenseman, you are putting yourself in a position where you have a material advantage in the game state. When you are consistently on offense, when you play 55, 60% of the game in the other team's zone, and you stick with it and you don't get frustrated and you don't get away from it, eventually it starts to break down. And the more you make them uncomfortable, the more likely you are to get those guys to make a mistake. The Hyman goal happens because of a bad zone, a bad attempt in the offensive zone on the Vegas end, and Edmonton is able to get going in the other direction. And yeah, there was definitely a bit of desperation on the Vegas front to try and find a way to get that goal to win this game, because in spite of the fact how poorly they played, it was 2-2 with 3 minutes to go. And even if you don't win it in the most convincing fashion, you win on a squeaker. No one cares 10 years from now. You go back and you look at the box score, you see the team that won the game and that went on to win the series. They don't care how long it is. The people who watch the game, you'll remember Zach Hyman's goal and Connor Brown's goal to put this away. But if Vegas goes on to win this series, they won't remember they played terribly in game one. They'll remember, oh, what happened? Oh, we won the series, because ultimately that's how people's memories work. They remember the really happy experiences and they remember the really, really traumatic experiences. And that's generally how they frame their logic. And speaking of framing of logic, coming up next on Locked On Oilers, I'm going to tell you the big takeaways from this game the Oilers can use as building blocks going forward to win this series as slight underdogs, even though they're up 1-0 in the series. I'll see you guys in a second on this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day.
Did you know getting a good night's sleep is the #1 recipe for long-term success in life? I didn't. It took me way longer to realize than I'd like to admit. It was years of tossing and turning. I was always tired. I never felt like I could live up to my potential, but not anymore. Thanks to Bear Mattress. I used their sleep quiz, and I matched with the Elite Hybrid. It's perfect for side sleepers like me. Now I wake up energized. I'm getting deeper sleeps, and I'm ready to attack the day. No matter how you sleep, Bare Mattress has a match for you with a focus on recovery, cooling, and pressure relief to upgrade your sleep and improve your overall quality of life. Go to baremattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout for 40% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. You have to use my promo code on the very last page of checkout to get this discount. That's baremattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for 40% off site-wide. Baremattress.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL.
Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on today's Game 1 Victory Wednesday, I should say, edition of Locked On Oilers. And you can't draw sweeping conclusions from one game in a best of 7. But there's too much variance and volatility on a game-to-game basis, especially because you're playing the same team over and over again. Teams start to pick up, and it becomes a game of cat and mouse. Because the Oilers played a certain way tonight, and they won. Vegas is going to make adjustments based on what happened tonight. And then Edmonton is going to expect to, A, keep building on what they've already done so far in the playoffs in Game 1. And then they're going to need to adjust to whatever the Vegas adjustments are. And it creates a back and forth. And I should explain this because I haven't talked about this yet in the playoffs, because the series against the Kings was such a... I'm trying to think of a word I can say on air that won't get me in trouble. It was such a mess. It was sloppy. It was disorganized. It was not as tactile as you would typically expect the playoff series to be. There was a lot of open space. There was a lot of star players making plays outside of structure. But generally speaking, we would classify hockey and soccer as married to the system. And I was talking with one of my friends who covers the Penguins, who does a lot of hockey content. Jesse Marshall used to work at The Athletic. He does a bunch of great stuff. We were talking about the Rangers hiring Mike Sullivan, and I was really kind of trying to pick his brain about Mike Sullivan's tenure in Pittsburgh. And the thing he attributed to Mike Sullivan, especially early on, and one of the driving factors as to why the Penguins were able to go on and win those Stanley Cups early in his tenure, was that Mike Sullivan was willing to change his system. He was willing to adapt what he did based on the opponent. And that's a bit untraditional. That's unorthodox for the hockey space. Hockey and soccer, the way we teach systems and the way coaches coach, it's not that we need to change what we're doing. It's we need to execute the system better. When a team is struggling, even in a playoff series where you do have a little bit more consistency in your opponent and you have a bit more of a sample size to work with as far as your execution, teams are not going to materially change what they do systems-wise in the middle of a playoff series because there's not enough time. You don't have morning skates. You don't have full practices in the playoffs because too many guys are hurt. Too many guys are sore. Those guys are better served by getting extra rest, by getting extra treatment, than they are trying to learn something new on the fly. And you compare that to football, basketball, where you pick up on a tendency within a given game and you have counters for that. Football and basketball are a lot more like chess in that respect, where if in football a team is sitting in a too high look with two safeties at the top, they are inviting you to run the ball. And if you can run the ball effectively, they're going to have to bring someone down towards the line of scrimmage. They're going to have to sub one of those safeties out for an extra linebacker, or they're going to have to sub a corner out for an extra linebacker to try and stop the run. So if they're in a one high look, that's going to create opportunities to attack them in the middle of the field, up the seams, where you would line up a slot receiver or a tight end in an offset position. In basketball, if you're getting killed on the pick and roll, you're going to switch to a switch-heavy defense where you're just going to stay with the ball, or you're going to pass off the guy who's driving on you to the person closer to you, and you're going to pick up who they were covering as a means of trying to facilitate smoother defense and to not worry so much about mismatches and just having a body in front. And in hockey, we don't typically see teams do that. They are going to get to their game, and if it doesn't work, they're going to double or triple down on it. So now with that preamble out of the way, the Oilers were very effective on the cycle tonight, and they got effective in transition as this game went along. I expect Vegas, as a means of trying to make improvements on what they did tonight. Number one, to try and mitigate the Edmonton forecheck. I'm going to expect first the Vegas forward who's trying to receive that pass so they can skate the puck out of the zone. I imagine that player is going to be 10 feet away as opposed to 15 or 20. Number two, I imagine there is going to be an emphasis on fewer hope plays. And a hope play, this is something else I learned from Jesse when we were talking about Mike Sullivan. And we all have different words for these things as hockey people. But a hope play is when a player moves the puck without a real idea of where it's going. They are moving it in the hope that their teammate is going to be able to make a play on it. They are moving it in hope that a player on the other team is not going to get in the way of it. And it's going to be a real challenge for the Oilers in this series if Vegas can find ways to mitigate the forecheck, because your forecheck, it really can be your life's blood. If you get your forecheck going and you make the other team uncomfortable, you start to accumulate, you start to wear them down. And that's what happened tonight. Vegas hung on as long as they could. And then the Draisaitl goal happens and it's 2-2. And you really can't get anything going offensively. Vegas had a couple okay looks in the third period. Picker, like I said, Picker made a few nice saves. They had a good penalty kill. But you need to find ways to make Vegas uncomfortable. And we talked about it a little bit with Chris Golick on the crossover preview that Minnesota did a good job in transition. Kaprizov and Boldy in particular had really effective series, putting pressure on Alex Pietrangelo in transition, making him actively defend. And if the Oilers' forecheck is going to be this effective, those transition opportunities will be there. Because the beautiful part, if you get both going simultaneously, the way the Oilers did by the end of this game, you get the other team so unbelievably out of sorts that they are disorganized, that they can't do anything right. And that's where you get opponents start trying to make plays outside of structure. You get them desperate, and they're the ones that are swimming against the tide of a forecheck. And that's where you want to be in a playoff series. But that will do it for today's Victory Wednesday, Game 1 of the second round edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much to everyone that made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For your second listen, be sure to check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night on the Locked On NHL feeds, wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.